We already know that Dr. Phil is a terrible, terrible show that exploits people's mental health problems, set people up to humiliate them live in front of an audience, all for the sake of entertainment. With Danielle Bregoli, also known as Bad Baby, speaking out about her experience with Dr. Phil and her time at Turnabout Ranch, it paints a pretty grim picture.
So I'm not really sure why Dr. Phil still sends kids here. It really doesn't make sense. Like, are you trying to help them or are you trying to hurt them even more?
Not only is he okay with using people who often are all out of options and in desperate need of actual help so he can get his views, not only is he okay with taking someone who's very obviously suffering from anything from delusions to a personality disorder, and instead of actually offering helpful advice, he just turns this person into a laughingstock and tells them to start acting rational. If that alone wasn't enough to convince you that he doesn't genuinely want to help anyone, and he has no problem even hurting them in the process, then at least I hope the multiple young people that appeared on his show coming out about how he sent them to a treatment facility that has been accused of abuse would be an eye-opener.
I would like you to go to a place that I know about that's called Turnabout Ranch, and it is a therapeutic school environment.
Suffice to say that Philly has many skeletons in his closet, and the videos on top of videos that pretty much every commentary YouTuber has made about him at one point is only scratching the surface of it. To me, there's always been one episode that has stuck out to me, and as I revisit it as an adult with a better understanding of how us autistic people function, I was even more deeply disturbed by what I watched. It's a 2-part exclusive jailhouse interview with an attempted murderer. For better or worse, I could only find the first part as a re-upload on YouTube with less than 500 views. I looked everywhere, but I could only assume they finally took it down and erased any trace of it, after previously stating that they 100% stood by that episode. If I find the second part, then perhaps I will do a follow-up if there's anything I could add, but for now I have more than enough criticism for one video. The episode in question aired back in 2014 and was called shit, almost puked. The Mother Who Attempted to Kill Herself and Her Autistic Daughter. Really makes you wonder how an episode focused on interviewing a mother who attempted to kill her own daughter could go wrong. Do you really trust the man who's known for demonizing people that struggle with mental health on national TV to do this case justice? Because there's a reason they put emphasis on autistic. Doesn't matter if the child was neurotypical or autistic, murder is murder after all. But as media aren't really condoning these actions, they're at the very least very sympathetic and quick to paint a picture that tells us that what she did was reasonable under her circumstances. By that I mean, her kid was autistic, prone to violent outbursts, which was a primary focus while discussing this case. With a few comments akin to, "She's autistic, she didn't know any better," and "I love her, but my child was trapped in an autistic body," sprinkled in there to convince us that this was a mother at her wit's end. This was a loving mother, a victim of her child's autism. She was cornered. The problem is that most people look at this from a neurotypical lens, which is so frustrating to someone like me, someone who is autistic. I'm not exactly like her, no autistic person is the same, but what we have in common is experiencing the world as an autistic individual, and to me it's painfully obvious that this isn't a bad kid. She was cornered. The obsession with listening to those who study autism to find a way to make us appear neurotypical, or even rid our neurodivergency completely, above those of us who actually experience it, has led us down a rabbit hole of awareness but fundamental misunderstanding, which I will address later in this video. I think it's about time we get right into this case.
I'm only Dr. Phil on the show. When I get home, I'm worthless.
Kelly Stapleton is the mother of one son, Muggen, okay, that's odd, and 2 daughters, Ainsley and Isabel, better known as Izzy, then 14-year-old autistic girl. She was a very troubled teen, to say the least, and not without reason. Not only did she have a tendency to get violent with her mother and sister, but she absolutely couldn't be told no. Kelly recalled times where her tantrums escalated to a point where Izzy knocked her unconscious. My sympathy for this woman starts and ends there. From my research, I can tell you now that Izzy isn't inherently violent because of her autism. No autistic person is. She was provoked constantly. Still, whether she had a reason to lash out or if she was just plain evil as she's portrayed, nothing justifies what Kelly did. No matter how difficult a child is, no matter how many tantrums they throw, no matter what they do, there's never a reason good enough for you to say that attempting to kill your own kid is understandable. Izzy had just completed 7 months of a residential treatment. Even after those 7 months, only a day passed since her return before Kelly resorted to drastic measures, to put it lightly.
Will this ever happen again?
I think it's very unlikely.
The morning of the 4th of September, Kelly brought Izzy out for a camping trip. The rest of the family had no idea that Kelly's plan was to commit murder-suicide. We know that this was premeditated because she had to get 2 grills that she brought with them, which she then lit inside the van as she had her daughter lay down to take a nap with her in the bed at the very back of the van. They were later found unconscious from carbon monoxide poisoning. Although both of them later recovered, Izzy entered a coma that lasted several days. After finally waking up, they found that she had suffered brain damage as a result. To me, this is a very tragic case that hits close to home. Clearly, this is just the climax of the invisible abuse that many autistic children are subjected to, including me, where in the aftermath, the poor child is demonized for lashing out after repeatedly having their boundaries violated. This is far from an isolated incident, but it's what I'll focus on for now. Like in many of these cases, it was found that 80% of the media coverage was sympathetic towards Kelly, while the remaining 20% were more objective, and there was practically nothing in defense of Izzy. Dr. Phil was no different. While still trying to shine light on mental health and why some people do what they do, they sure as hell wasn't focusing on Izzy or even attempted to discuss why a 14-year-old might have had these violent outbursts. Instead, they tried to sway the public opinion in favor of the attempted murderer. To make it clear, I'm not saying that Dr. Phil at any point endorsed her actions or even said that her actions were understandable. Nothing of that sort.
She felt she had no other choice.
This woman was desperate. She had absolutely run out of options. She was up against the wall and was not in her right mind at the time she did this.
Damn, Dr. Phil, you're like bad. You're like a bad boy, aren't you? Like, morally speaking. What I'm saying is that they purposely gave Kelly a platform where she could tell her story and be humanized, which evidently worked as seen in these comments. Now why is this lady in jail when so many hardened criminals get to work? Shaking my head and... I'm so sad for Kelly. She is a kind-hearted woman. She needs to be set free.
What the You want penis enlargement pills?
At the same time as I do think she should be able to tell her story, it is vital that you bring on experts that could do Izzy and all other autistic people justice, and possibly even prevent this from repeating itself. But as always, that's too much to ask for. To absolutely no one's surprise, I happened to dig up a now deleted page about autism on Dr. Phil's website from 2007 called Autism spectrum disorder, early warning signs, where they linked Autism Speaks as a resource, notorious for speaking over actually autistic people and demonizing us. So I think it's safe to say that Dr. Philadelphia has no interest in destigmatizing the disorder. There's more profit in sensationalizing it as a disorder that makes children violent. So because I don't want Dr. Phil or any of his henchmen to copyright strike me and feed on my corpse, I'm not gonna risk it by putting any clips of the interview, so I'm just gonna read out my transcript. You're stuck with my stupid voice, sorry.
You're ugly, you're disgusting, I'm gonna kill you, give me $200.
I want to start out by saying that they really put emphasis on Izzy being dangerous. That's what the voiceover after the commercial break says, word for word, along with, like any child, her face looks so innocent and is so innocent, but this innocent face belongs to a child with autism. Like, I don't know what to tell you. They said that with their whole chest, so that's cool, I guess. Dr. Fuckface sets the scene in the very beginning by saying, what really happened to this adoring, devoted mother that made her think that murder-suicide was the only option left? Today we'll find out the answer to those questions, and hopefully by the end we will have a better understanding of how a mother, a loving mother, could just snap. I mean, pack it up. This alone clearly shows where their sympathy lay. I don't know about you, but I wouldn't call a mother who just attempted to murder her daughter an adoring, devoted and loving mother. I mean, that could be true. I'm sure she was a great mother to her neurotypical children, but you don't include that unless you're trying to get the audience to think, "Aw, poor woman, she was a victim of an autistic child. Poor baby." If you're already sickened by what he has to say, then you can click off, because it only gets worse from here. Please don't click off though, I need the views. Like and subscribe. Please, I have no shame anymore, I'm just begging. His initial question to her was, did you attempt to kill your daughter? Like, what kind of question is that? She planned it. She knew what she was doing when she lit the grills, closed the van and went to sleep. Her answer to that question wasn't a simple yes, which would be the correct and obvious answer. Kelly answered, I would say no. On September 3rd, we were gonna go to heaven together. It wasn't the end, it was the beginning. Whether you believe in heaven or not, that doesn't change the fact that you have to die to go there. It sickens me because it's no more than sugarcoating what she did. He moves on by asking her, how did you come to that decision? To which she responds with, Isabel and her aggression oftentimes targets her sister, and I could not keep Ainsley safe anymore. I just looked at one daughter and looked at the other one, and I just made a decision then. Ainsley is just never gonna be hit again. This little girl deserves to grow up free from this violence from her sister. Of course, I don't think a child should be subjected to violence. I want to remind you that not only could this have been avoided by raising your autistic kid in a way that isn't absolute torture, but it's also very hypocritical to say that a kid deserves to grow up free of violence while ensuring that one kid doesn't get to grow up at all. Like, bro, I don't know why this should be such a controversial take, but it's not okay to kill your autistic kid. Philly D keeps it coming by simply stating, I want to take you back to how it all started. A big issue here that built up to this moment is that Izzy is amazingly violent. She attacks people. She was diagnosed with autism at 2. Because, yeah, that's obviously the big issue here. Her being diagnosed with autism. You know, this would have been the perfect opportunity to ask, why is Izzy violent? But he didn't. I also want to take the opportunity to say that many of Izzy's family members actually contradicted Kelly's description of her daughter. They said that Izzy was actually often fine with other family members and care workers, and they even saw improvement in her temperament at the treatment facility she spent 7 months at. That was until they reintroduced her mom. Do you see a pattern here? 'cause I do. Kelly had even allegedly tweeted that AIDS had offered her tips on how to manage Izzy's behavior in a way that wouldn't cause meltdowns, but she rejected their advice. Woman, do you want her to stop being violent or not? This is a problem with the so-called autism moms, because they want to quote-unquote fix their child to make them appear neurotypical. In Kelly's own words, "I'm so damn mad at watching my husband, a good man, work hard and never get ahead. He can't keep his family safe and he can't fix his broken daughter." Bruh. Yes, you might be successful in getting a child to act in a way that makes sense to you, but you haven't actually fixed them. They're not more neurotypical. You've simply taught them to act in a way that doesn't make sense to them, but it pleases you, so they'll do it. In the words of Ivor Lovas, the founder of ABA Therapy, you see, you start pretty much from scratch when you work with an autistic child. You have a person in the physical sense. They have hair, a nose, a mouth, but they are not people in the psychological sense. One way to look at the job of helping autistic kids is to see it as a matter of constructing a person. You have the raw materials, but you have to build the person. If that's not one of the most disgusting quotes, I don't know what is. Our odd behaviors are based on how we perceive the world. That's something you can never change. If your solution is to teach us to act in a way that most neurotypicals can understand and hide our different needs, it might work for a while in some cases, but it doesn't change the fact that we are suppressing needs that build up until it overflows. Their conversation continues, but a lot of it is just them talking about how Izzy is violent and difficult to deal with. It's like they've made a separation between Izzy and autism. At one point, Kelly says, "Autism became a deadly condition in our house." No matter how much you try and reason with it, you just can't make that distinction. Autism isn't this separate entity that possesses your daughter. She is autistic. She's autistic, confused, scared, overwhelmed, and alienated, taking drastic measures to finally get you to respect her boundaries. More on that later, and perhaps even a separate video because it's something that I'm really passionate about at the moment. I'm enraged by the injustices because autistic people, me included, are treated poorly and constantly provoked. When we eventually snap, we're monstrous and out of control. It's not even as if our needs are difficult to meet. It's just that it makes us look odd by wearing ear defenders and sunglasses indoors. They expand on her initial statement when Dr. Phil asked her, "Were you convinced at the moment that you were both going to die?" To which she responds, "We were going to heaven." All while she is technically answering the question, she's purposely avoiding outright stating that yes, they were going to die. Philly D goes along with this narrative asking, "You didn't think about it as death?" To which she again responds with, "I believe that Jesus would come and take us." I love you, Jesus. That's nice and all, but do you think you were going to die? Yes or no? I'm not religious myself, and while I think it's pretty neat that there's some people that believe in heaven, I mean, who am I to say there isn't? Still, religious or not, even if you believe there's a better afterlife, you can still recognize that killing is bad, and you can't really justify it by saying, "Well, I sent him to a better place, y'all should be thankful." Later, Phil wasn't really putting words in her mouth. I would rather describe it as guiding her by giving suggestions. When he asked her if she was familiar with the term mercy killing, and if that's what she was doing, which she denied, I had to pause the interview right there, because I just couldn't believe the words that had just left this bald man's mouth. I don't even know why she denied it. Doesn't mercy killing sound better than saying, "No, I was just straight up trying to kill my daughter because she's autistic"? Neurotypicals. They're so complicated, am I right? Kelly also said that it didn't feel like she was trying to murder her daughter, and she doesn't think it was an evil act on her part when asked. Clearly an attempt to downplay it. I highly doubt they would care about this if it wasn't for the autistic label. If it was simply a neurotypical kid that happens to be an absolute pain in the ass. Because, you know, that happens. You don't have to be autistic to have the absolute worst relationship with your parents. If that was the case, then I can almost guarantee you that everyone would be quick to say that it doesn't matter how difficult your kid is. Nothing they do could warrant attempted murder. But because Izzy is autistic, suddenly it's a very nuanced conversation about whether it's actually murder. Because I guess us autistics are subhuman in comparison to other kids. Great. I love knowing that because I'm autistic, the abuse I've suffered at the hands of my dad was actually deserved. Not gonna lie, I actually believed that for a long time. Because that's what I was told. Not anymore. Now I'm just angry, and I want justice for any autistic kid and ensure their mental and physical well-being. Life does not have to be this difficult if people actually listen to autistic voices. Of course, of fucking course, Dr. Dingus said, being in jail all of this time, you are away from all of that turmoil. You're away from that helpless, hopeless feeling. Has there been any guilty pleasure of relief at not having to deal with it? To which she responds with, the jail in Benzie County has been a much kinder warden than the jail of autism has been. Ma'am, that's not how autism fucking works! Someone needs to educate these bitches, Jesus Christ! What makes this interview even more eerie is the fact that she most definitely isn't alone in this way of thinking. I'm not... Oh fuck. I'm not even surprised that there's people who have reached out to her saying that they've also considered killing their autistic children, as if that's something completely sane and normal thing to do and absolutely doesn't raise any red flags. Why would it? Everyone seriously contemplates murdering their children every once in a while. I'm not surprised, because I've seen how people talk about autistic people. I've seen how mothers talk about their autistic children. There's good mothers of autistic children. For example, mine is a pretty good one. But by God, it sends shivers down my spine whenever autism moms are mentioned. The conclusion that anyone who isn't educated on this subject would draw from watching this interview would be, attempting to kill your child is bad, but she's such a loving mother. She had no other option. This poor woman was the victim of an autistic child. If you're gonna make an episode portraying her as a saint, could you at the very fucking least bring on some experts that talk about why Izzy might have been acting out? If not for the benefit of the kid, then do it for the family as to make their life easier living with an autistic child. They couldn't even do that. Instead they're like, this kid is an out-of-control monster. Autism is making them like this. Absolutely nothing else. Nope, nothing you can do about it. Quick, pour your money into organizations that funds abuse of autistic people and research for a cure. All while this interview is a hot mess, what else is new? This is the Dr. Phil we all know and love. Or, this is the Dr. Phil we know. End of sentence. But wait, it gets juicier. Kelly Stapleton has a blog called The Status Quo, where you can follow her thoughts, feelings and development as a person from the 3rd September of 2012, exactly 1 year before that fateful day. Initially I was planning on reading all of it, so I began reading her very first post. Coincidentally, it started the same way it all ended, at a camping trip. That would be more poetic if it wasn't for the fact, well, I can't put this in a dignified way, but her entire post was just a very detailed retelling of her having explosive diarrhea. That's when I decided that I just could not read all of it, so I resorted to going through the post tagged with autism, matricide by autism, and autism and aggression. A theme through most of her posts is her victimhood and painting her daughter as an absolute demon. She has no good things to say about her, except for the occasional, "She's so smart," and to me that always comes off as more belittling rather than genuine compliments. It's like she's talking about a dog rather than an actual child. In one post she wrote, "I've been bruised from head to toe. I wear a DNR, do not resuscitate bracelet. I would hate to have to die like this twice." Without context, that sounds really bad, and I would think she was talking about an abusive husband. Of course I would feel terrible. However, that's nowhere near the case. We're talking about an autistic and abused kid. The post in question is titled "Domestic Abuse and Why I Choose to Live with My Abuser," which is a long and heartfelt post that ends with revealing who her abuser is by stating, "So why do I stay? Because my abuser is my autistic daughter. She is now much larger than me and has no understanding of the damage she does." That is far from the worst post actually. One that really caught my attention is titled "Autism's Hard to Love Club." It offers us a glimpse into Kelly's thoughts about her own daughter, which to me as an autistic person is kinda terrifying, seeing as if I didn't have a loving mother who went out of her way to reduce my stress levels, I could have very well been another Izzy. But I'm not. I would belong to what she calls the easy to love club, because not only have I learned to conceal my autistic traits, but we've also found ways for me to exist in a way that isn't constantly overwhelming for me. It could be better, but I'm currently getting by. I've picked out parts from Autism's Hard to Love Club to give you an idea what it's about. She's a teenager now. She is overweight. It isn't her fault. We had her on medications that caused her to gain weight. A lot of weight. But there isn't anything endearing about an overweight teenager rampaging through a house or a classroom. She could care less about hygiene. She is loud. She is scary. Imagine the worst tantrum you've ever seen from a toddler. Now picture that with a teenager the size of an adult, with an adrenaline infusion like those of a person lifting a car off of a loved one. That's what it looks like for us, every day, every single day. People in the autism community understand and embrace the Hard to Love Club, right? Nope, they can't. Before I continue, I just need to chime in here. I don't think that the autism community's problem has anything to do with Izzy. It has to do with how you not only talk about your daughter, but also the fact that she's having these tantrums as a result of stress. Anyways, autism organizations and big names can't risk talking about autism and aggression/violence in the same sentence. Many people have told me to shut the F up, not to talk about aggression and autism, that I'm not helping the cause, that I'm being selfish. By the way, she totally is being selfish. Demonizing and fear-mongering isn't gonna help us educate people about our special needs. Seriously, it's almost as if she's threatening us with autism when she writes this. If you're in the Hard to Love Club, you aren't alone. We don't have much, but we have each other. Our club will grow. Problem behaviors are a part of autism, and if autism is on the rise, so are behaviors. Autism isn't on the rise, our knowledge about autism is expanding, and because of that, we can recognize it in people that maybe learn to mask. Nothing has changed. We're simply able to help people that have previously suffered in silence because they seem functional to the outside world. I'll admit, maybe what I have to say wouldn't have changed much. I am by no means an expert. I'm not a researcher. I don't have statistics to prove that I'm actually right. What I do have is my own experience and the experience of people like me. So when I read about all the therapy they've put Izzy through in the hopes that she will grow up to at least appear neurotypical, it just clicked. Here's what Kelly had to say. We started an ABA program with her when she was 2. That's intensive behavioral intervention. We stopped when she was 5 since she was in a typical school full time. Yay, Izzy! For those who know the lingo, we did ABA, 2 years of GFCF, not a diet responder, DMA, all the supplements from the Kirkman catalogue. We have also done auditory integration, RDI, sensory therapy, OT, ST, and an exorcism. The last one is a joke. I mean, I would hope the last one is a joke, but knowing autism moms, I wouldn't be surprised if she actually did try it. As you can tell, they've tried a variety of things. They began ABA therapy at the age of 2, as soon as she was diagnosed. What's important to take notice of is that before this she wasn't actually violent or anything. That came after therapy. They simply wanted her to interact with the world and develop in a more acceptable way.
She was about 18 months old, and we first started getting an inkling that we were dealing with autism. We started a home program. We really maximized early intervention. And I remember right before she turned 2, I had this conversation and I said, well, at least she's not violent. And honestly, the next day, she hit.
ABA therapy has a long history of abuse, and though today it doesn't seem harmful to the uncritical eye, simply because you're only playing with the autistic kid and encouraging wanted behavior, it's still invisible abuse that only autistic people that has grown up and now have a better understanding of their needs can recognize the harm in. I'm definitely planning on making a video going into more detail, but to summarize it, the kid might seem happy to do ABA initially, and though you're not punishing them at any point, the goal of ABA is to get the kid to act in accordance to neurotypical behavior, communicate in a way they deem acceptable, and even suppress autistic behavior that is often self-soothing and sometimes even a sign of a child being in a lot of distress. The child doesn't understand why they must act in a certain way. All they know is that they must listen obediently. If they're exposed to a loud environment that overwhelms their senses, they're taught that they must not react or show distress. That doesn't make it less distressing though. ABA therapy is only for the benefit of the family, because it only makes the child more miserable and unable to communicate it, because their feelings have been dismissed and they're told that what makes them uncomfortable isn't valid because neurotypicals can handle it, so they must simply learn to pretend as if everything is okay. At the same time, as Kelly stated, this is intense therapy that some children have to undergo 40 hours a week. She began at the age of 2. That's way too much pressure on a kid. There's a lot of other methods I would love to criticize, but I want to keep this video comprehensive. Where I'm getting at is that the therapy that was meant to improve Izzy's quality of life was very likely the Stapleton's downfall. Autistic or not, if you have your boundaries constantly violated, your needs are not met, and in fact they try to rid these needs by exposing you to it more, it's reasonable to say that anyone would have a short fuse due to the constant high stress levels. Izzy became more difficult, which in return made Kelly seek out even more intensive therapy, only perpetuating this evil cycle of abuse. From the age of 2, Izzy was taught that no matter how much she cried, no matter what she did to show that she was in pain, her needs were ignored, and like most autistic children, learned that the best and quickest way to get away was to simply comply. When she discovered that she could get her way through violence, then that's what she resorted to. I'm not saying that by giving in when she threw a fit you failed as parents. You failed as parents at the very moment you taught her that her needs aren't valid and taught her that her natural way of communicating was wrong. Do I think Kelly's pure evil? No. I think she was uneducated and misled by those who focus on erasing neurodivergency rather than helping and embracing our differences. I can sympathize with a parent who's struggling to raise an autistic kid, even though they do things that are harmful to the kid because oftentimes they don't know better. But I can't sympathize with Kelly after what she did. We only get to hear about this case from a neurotypical perspective where Izzy was a tyrant, when in reality she was the victim all along. She was the victim of abuse and demonized when she lashed out. Despite our awareness of autism spectrum disorder, it continues to be extremely misunderstood. It's the result of one of the biggest so-called advocacy groups for autism, that being Autism Speaks, actually being a hate group that does a better job of stigmatizing it and turning the life of autistic people into a bigger nightmare than it has to be. But it's still very influential despite the lack of autistic representation. Very few seem to care about what's for the better of autistic people and more about how we make autistic people more bearable to the rest of the world. When in reality, finding solutions to help us with our needs is for the better of everyone in the long run. Neurotypical voices have been at the center of autism advocacy for way too long. Dr. Phil is far from the only one guilty of this. It's about time we actually listen and elevate autistic voices that know our experience better than anyone else. It's about time Autism Speaks is recognized as the hateful organization it truly is. And you bet your sweet ass I'm gonna speak more about it. So if you're interested to know more about my thoughts and feelings as an autistic person, feel free to subscribe, like this video, comment your thoughts cause I would love to hear from others. Follow me on Twitter at Muggen Mylle. That's all I had to say. Bye.